His research expertise is on India's role as a regional power and the intersecting dimensions of security, connectivity, and democracy across South Asia and the Indian Ocean. He also works on India's relations with the European Union and other democratic powers in the Pacific. He has published widely in academic books and journals on India's foreign and security policy. Dr. Javier most recently co-edited PSDP reports on connectivity and cooperation in Bay of Bengal region that basically this is the report that I'm going to present today. And China in South Asia, themes, partners, and tools. He's writing a book on India's neighborhood policies since 1950s, based on the classified documents and interviews with decision makers in India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. At CSEP, he is also leading research projects on India's infrastructure and connectivity partnership, climate cooperation framework, and technical vulnerability. He regularly teaches and lectures on foreign policy and external affairs at international universities and also in India's diplomatic, administrative, and military institutions. Dr. Xavier holds a PhD in South Asian Studies from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, an MPhil and MA from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and a BA with undergraduate studies at Nova University, Lisbon, and Sciences of Paris. So it's a very colorful academic and professional background. So without losing any time, I'm happy to him for the presentation itself. And we will be hoping that we'll have more time for question answer because of our faculty who are working session we are present today. Is it okay for 20 minutes? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for the kind introduction, Professor Hart. I want to apologize for being late. I heard over the last few days people often like to blame Dhaka traffic, but I'm not going to do that. I think it's my bad planning and a mix of my passion for connectivity. I was meeting the High Commissioner of India, and he's equally passionate about connectivity in the India-Bangladesh relation. I think I got distracted in talking about what brought me to India, brought me to South Asia, which is studying connectivity and correcting the gap of connectivity in this region. This region is beautiful and exceptional in many ways, but it is also exceptional in some not so good ways, which is the lack of integration, lack of cooperation, lack of interdependence. And I hope to share with you today the outcomes of our report, of our work, and convince you that we are living a unique moment in the subcontinent where there are all ingredients to correct finally this gap that still hinders the region and the development and growth of the region through coexistence and independence. Professor, thank you for hosting me here today. It's a pleasure. I've read so much from your faculty at South University in my career, my PhD, in my studies. I believe it's 30 years or more than 30 years now, since 92 that South University is established. I see that yesterday you had a convocation ceremony featuring a distinguished fellow from my center.
From your center, exactly.
One big thing about
it. Also part of.
One distinguished fellow working with us on climate and particularly these days on climate finance, climate cooperation, and even climate and foreign policy project, part of that larger climate initiative of the Center for Social and Economic Progress in New Delhi, where I'm a fellow and work on foreign policy. So thanks for having me today. And part of the South Asian Institute for Policy and Governance, Center for Peace Studies. And if there's one person that is responsible for me being here in Dhaka and championing the connectivity cause in Delhi, he's sitting here also to my left, and Dr. Shahidul Haq, or may I say Professor Ambassador, Professor Diplomat, Scholar Diplomat, which he really is. He's doing his own PhD now. He's published over the years on migration, on refugees, and I think you are very well equipped also having Ambassador Haq here as a professor at the university. And we're blessed to have him in Delhi actually for the next few more months. And it's been, I think, 2 years now, right? So it's total that he will be with us in Delhi. And which speaks also about the importance of having people from Bangladesh in Delhi, people from Delhi in Bangladesh But thank you for all having me, and also Dr. Wahab for organizing all this, putting it together, and being so patient in putting this together. Let me just go back to the point of how the center, you call the Center for Peace Studies. You're the South Asian Institute for Policy and Governance. Maybe the best enabler of peace is connectivity and growth. I think history shows us that whenever there has been prosperity, there is peace. Sometimes, though, the transition to prosperity can get ugly. In fact, you will know as political scientists and economists here, the J-curve model of transition, right? That things get worse before they get better. That happens is systematically, it happened in Europe through world wars. The growth engine of Europe was industrialization, late 19th century. A lot of blood was shed in two world wars, well beyond Europe, that destroyed human lives and resources around the world, those two world wars. And it's only after that decline that Europe really accelerated into its history of interdependence through growth and prosperity and peace. So that's the first caveat I would just leave out there, that maybe peace is important. It comes through growth and connectivity, but the road to peace is often quite rocky. There's often stability in poverty. You've seen that. There's stability in prosperity, but the transition between those two levels is, from a political science perspective, we've seen historically is very difficult. That's the first note of caution I'd like to make. That we often think that if we just connect and trade with each other, we will automatically be more peaceful. It's actually very important to understand that there are high political costs, risks to engineer growth in the There will be losers. There will be people dissatisfied. Old monopolies are destroyed. Old social structures are destabilized. Old habits, old perceptions. So moments of transition, whether human or national and regional, are always very so I'd like to keep in mind, because I'm going to give a very favorable image of that, but I hope that that is one of the main outputs of the project. I'll give out a copy, maybe to circulate. I have for you to have a look at this product. This is the connectivity and cooperation of the Bay of Bengal region. It's a simple exercise where we thought, let's bring around 9-10 scholars from the broader Bay of Bengal and Bimstec region, because that is where the locus of growth has been and will be. From a Delhi perspective, if I may, because I'm looking at that from that perspective, we don't see growth to the west. Things are difficult with Pakistan. They have been good in the past. In the 2000s, a lot of SARC and growth and regionalism that we still operate on. We still benefit from SAFTA, for example, which Bangladesh and India both benefit from, was created then. But that's stagnant. It's not growing. And we have to be pragmatic. It's been now 6-7 years. You could almost argue it's been 15 years of no political impetus between India and Pakistan, and that SARC agenda. Right? Even the 2011 or 12 Maldives SARC summit, these were all inflicted already. But the glorious age of SARC was under the political approximation between India and Pakistan between around 2003, 2008. Those 5 years is when you see the highest intensity of growth under SARC and the boldest moves on the agenda, which we are still operating. To the north, things are not good in terms of connectivity. India and China today have massive disagreements. That's a political reality. India and China will have to reset their relationship, which has not worked one they set up in the 1990s. Both sides understand that. It's going to take a long time. It's not about the border. It's about finding a place and respecting each other's place in a changing age and a change. So that takes a lot of time for two countries, 1.4 billion people with ambition, etc. Right? So that, I think we all agree, is going to take time. So there's not going to be much connectivity towards it. China is the second largest trade partner of India, yes, but that's trade, and we know trade is not the most important engine of economic interdependence, right? It's quite volatile. So south and the west is where the growth engine is for South Asia and the subcontinent. ASEAN has been systematically growing has systematically been pacified as a region. Don't forget, this was a region with so many conflicts and wars, and is coming. And from a perspective from India, and my initial remarks with that, and I'll just go quickly to the report. I was thinking this morning about the father of the current External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar. His father was K. Subramanian, bureaucrat, defense specialist, expert who led India's main defense think tank, IDSA, for many times. He's seen as the grand strategist between the 1970s. He advised Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. He's seen as a more realist strategist. But he also wrote on the neighborhood. People often don't see that. He wrote on nuclear non-proliferation, on China, on US relations. But he had some very interesting pieces in the 1980s about the neighborhood. And I thought in one piece from 1986 on the subcontinent, happy to share it, it shows a lot of the long-term thinking. He said that, we in India have a problem in the neighborhood. We always want to be loved. We want to be loved. Now, you can't make anyone love you, especially if you are very big. You're a big economy, you're a big geographic entity, you're a military preponderant power. There's no case in history where a predominant power has been loved and adored by its neighbors. Nobody. Even today, in Europe, France and Germany are far less predominant and symmetric with its neighbors than, say, India and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. But even today, people resent often France and Germany. Talk to the Italians, Greece, Portugal, Central European countries. They often see Germany and France as predominant. No one loves this country, the biggest country. And he has, therefore, a very nice expression I was thinking of. He says, sometimes we will be feared by our neighbors. We will naturally always animate fear. We're bigger, so we can talk about connectivity, but for a small country like Bhutan, connecting with India is quite overbearing. So let trucks or taxis or tourists come into your country, right? 1.4 billion people next to a tiny country that, doesn't even have the size of some of India's districts. Sometimes we will be tolerated. K. Subramanian told us in 86. Sometimes we'll be tolerated, allowed. And in some cases, even we will be welcome. Very few cases. We'll actually work really hard, we'll be welcome, but we will never be loved. And I think that says a lot about the mentality that you cannot expect emotions, you cannot expect initiative, you have to work very hard. And work means connecting, developing interdependence, developing diplomatic tools, establishing tools of long-term, cohesive coexistence structures, right? Through growth, by delivering financial systems, delivering on infrastructure. The subcontinent has horrendous infrastructure compared to parts of West Africa and South America and other developing parts, Southeast Asia. Correcting all that is a monumental. And as long as our eyes are set on correcting bridges, railways, border checkpoints, facilitating trade, power, river navigation, phenomenal opportunities will happen for all countries. So we can discuss, of course, the symmetry, interdependence, the politics of it. That first point I made, it will always be a rocky road. There'll be people that will oppose this, that are concerned, with legitimate concern. But in the end, as long as our eyes are set on correcting this gap that is abysmal, and in fact reviving it, because in many ways, by all indicators, you will know South Asia was more integrated in the 1950s than it was today. That is the paradox. In the 1950s, you could book a train in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and next evening be in Kolkata and buy a single ticket. They will take you from Colombo to the coast. You will have multimodal ferry link to take the wagon to the train to the Indian side and continue the train route all the way to Kolkata. Just to give you one example of what actually connectivity meant. You didn't need visas. In the 1950s, you had hundreds of Burmese students studying in Kolkata University. I'm not sure about Dhaka, but I'm sure there were links that were very strong in this region that had been driven. So, if I may just give you a brief gist before we open up for the discussion on I think the work that I lead at CSET, on Regional Connectivity Initiative. Again, we benefited a lot from Professor Shagun Haq, who helped us think through. He's contributed also a paper on sub-regional connectivity for the first report I'm here today. This is some of the work that we do on integrated check posts, railways, power, also softer sides of connectivity. We map how India is actually supporting its neighborhood in terms of humanitarian assistance or not. When does it do? We work on tourism connectivity. We're very interested in study on tourists coming to India. Actually, Bangladesh, as you know now, is the #1 country providing tourists to India. And on trade and education too. Two papers you can see on our website. That's not working, but yeah. Railways we're working on. I have a colleague working, doing great work now on regional connectivity in railways. We mapped 20 years of India's lines of credit and grants to the neighborhood and looked at patterns. If I may preview that, a big shift from grants to LOCs. Diplomatic capacity, how Indian diplomats trained, in language capabilities, in terms of missions and consulates in the neighborhood, coastal shipping, regional institutions, the BBIN region, in terms of surface transport, and also work on critical minerals and climate cooperation region too. Next, please. This is something we had a pleasure to host Ambassador Shayul Haq for a Samban Policy Dialogue. I hope some of you could also attend this. This is every few months we do an online dialogue on regional connectivity. Not geopolitics, not about ideology, politics and geostrategy. This is about different issues on geoeconomic linkages. So we had a variety of different high-level guests, including Ambassador Shayul Haq last year to give us a perspective on Bangladesh's approach then to the Pacific or to connectivity in the region. Next, please. This is a report today that I co-edited with Professor Amikul Palit. He's a senior fellow at the Institute of South Asia Studies, National University of Singapore. Also doing very good work on geoeconomics between South and Southeast Asia, digital connectivity. He's working on a lot of this. Next, please. Quick review of the report. We have a preface by Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, former Indian Foreign Secretary and National Security Advisor, who's a distinguished fellow with us, as is Montex Alvaya. Our introduction, setting out the ground of why this is so important. I shared some of these points here already today. And then 3 sections, leveraging geography, Amit Palit on regional supply chains and how they can fit in the regional ones into the global new value chain between East Asia, South Asia, and Europe. Conceptualizing highly facilitated trade corridors, how do you link the hinterland economies of South Asia with the coastal regions through multimodal linkages, for example, rivers. The role of Bangladesh in sub-regional connectivity by Ambassador Shayul Haq. This is not only about regions, sometimes smaller steps, smaller groups are much more important. In this case, Bangladesh, the northeast region of India, Bhutan, Nepal, that sub-region that is very important activity. So all these are 3 geographic contributions. 3 on the infrastructure. My colleague Riyad Sinha on the missing, on really only most puzzling missing rail link in Asia today, which is between India and Myanmar. Talk about trilateral highway, which hasn't been built still, but maybe it's time to think about railway connectivity also between Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Thailand beyond. Second, transshipment hubs. As you know, there's a lot of happening to support infrastructure in the region. Chatuni Kaviratna from Sri Lanka wrote a very interesting piece on smaller ports in the Bay of Bengal region as transshipment, not sort of big mega intercontinental ports. And on improving trade connectivity through mutual recognition of standards. We talk a lot about FTAs. So we know the BIMSTEC FTA is not doing very well, and big FTAs are not going well, but there are workarounds, for example, by simple agreements of mutual recognition of standards or mutual recognition of lab testing that can facilitate. Managing the commons is the last section, which is on 3 sort of non-traditional areas. Maritime security in the Bay of Bengal is critical. We don't secure the region, the sea lines of communication, we cannot trade with them. If there are refugees and populations floating literally and dying in the region, it will be very difficult to talk about economic activities. There will be security and political context that's very important to connectivity. Complex emerges in the Bay of Bengal, similar approach by Professor Jitian from Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. And finally, Aaron Saviologi on the aquatic approach to the Bay of Bengal fishery, how you manage fisheries, for example, just severely threatened Bay of Bengal region. So I'll end with 2, 3 takeaways next, please, which are details on introduction. 1, the Bay of Bengal is still a divider. If you look at geoeconomic integration, the Bay of Bengal is actually not a sub-region or region. It's really a block between South and Southeast Asia, those 2 growth markets, those 2 growth engines. And that needs to be corrected. More importantly, there's a rising connectivity competition, which means that now the region is being flooded with external offers, inducements, investments, finance instruments. Belt and Road by China has done a formidable job in supporting the modernization and developing of countries in the region. but we see that it's also being facing its limitations. India, its own connectivity initiatives. Japan, of course, with three Noble Indo-Pacific and instruments development like JICA, for example. Australia, the US with its own approach on connectivity now in the region. European Union, which has a connectivity and an Indo-Pacific policy now, is looking at this, for example, through the European Investment Bank that is looking for opportunities to finance infrastructure in the region. BIMSTEC, of course, the bank, ADB, AIB, to see a race competition for to grow, to connect, to correct this gap. This leads to redundancy because there's several actors doing the same things. This is therefore, next please, creating a burden and stakes on the region. You see what happened in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lanka story is often portrayed in the Western press as a death trap by China. That's far more simplistic than it actually was. Sri Lanka, in my view, will come up in the report and we argue in introduction, is the outcome of what may happen much more. Just state's capacity to absorb these instruments, these pressures and expectations. But that needs state capacity, long-term strategic vision, strong bureaucracy to decide, look into projects, assess the terms of loans, align with credit grants, and decide. One day we go with one country, the other with the other country for different projects. That requires a lot of state capacity, strategic planning for economic and development planning, and it requires foreign policy. It's not just a technocratic decision, this bridge is going to be built, that port is going to be given to country A. So therefore, it's urgent to correct the connectivity cooperation gap. Connectivity is increasing, but cooperation is not going. Yeah, so there's a need for commensurate cooperative coordination mechanisms. And today, the Bay of Bengal therefore is object of growing economic attention, and will be critical to create structures, and different structures, bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, regional, sub-regional, for countries to also exchange assessments and decide on what to get from whom, for what objective. I'll end with that and really looking forward to your discussion, your questions, your points on how we can take this research forward on the Bay of Bengal connected coverage. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting report for the class and also with some content. I would now request our designated discussant, Mr. Shahidul Haq, give his deliberation, and then we will open the floor and have more.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dean, for a very quick, lucid presentation. I'll take the full 3 minutes, but I think we'll keep more time for the participants to questions to you. 2, 3 things that I would like to add. First is that the whole idea and the perception that connectivity is something which is value neutral and which is non-static. That assumption is absolutely important. The connectivity, cooperation, partnership, these are geostrategic tool, geopolitical tool used by states. So that we should understand, and then it shouldn't be naive in negotiating industry. That's first. Second is that the whole concept of connectivity in the context of broader Indo-Pacific or Bay of Bengal has gone through changes. The way 10 years back we looked at connectivity is really not the same, especially in the context of the rivalry that's emerging. On the issue of connectivity, we also we read there are 2 models. One is the BRI model, and the other one is the more lucid. In the absence of any particular lead project, I would call what these acronyms are calling sustainable infrastructure initiatives. So, meaning that the BRI is on sustainable long term. So that's the two model, and there's a big deal of a competition in the BRI. Now, having said this, let me just 2 points on Bangladesh. As I see, Bangladesh is Bangladesh's centrality. That's very clear. Sometimes when we negotiate projects, we do not realize how critical Bangladesh's participation in the Bay of Bengal connectivity is. Which way we go? Because we not only occupy a big space in the bay, but also we are a very critical player. Without Bangladesh, very difficult to make Bay of Bengal connected, whether in terms of port, land. That has become more relevant because now there's a thinking that up in the Himalayas, down the plain of Pula to Bay, and then outside, which used to be the corridor before 1970. So that, if you want to have that without Bangladesh, just ignore it. Even through Myanmar and other corridors, through Assam, that place has become more unstable. So that's my interaction with my Indian colleagues in Delhi suggests that time being, although they have a Kaladan projects, but they're not looking at that because it's more unstable and less possibilities to create a sustainable space. So they're actually looking at this, and that brings Bangladesh into the center more than in the past. Now, then let's come to Dr. Kim's origins. Brings out issues because we possibly not in our radar. He was mentioning about buying his ticket in Colombo and ending up in Kolkata. There was a time when people from Naringal would go all the way to Assam because the British ran 33 steamboats in the Ganges and the Ganges Valley. Some of those steamers are still there. It was a British India steam navigation, and they made quite a bit of money. So there was a lot of people's mobility. Even I was going through a history archive. So 1956. So from 1956, someone actually can vote in Kolkata or in Assam, come to Nagaland without any visa requirement. So that was the kind of the mobility or connectivity that was there. So there's a drive to bring that back. That's very difficult because of the passport and the fear of Bangladeshis in India. That is open, then people end up in a large number. So that's the downside. So what are the challenges? I'll end with it. Challenges is that the way India looks at pain, certainly others do not look at pain. So there's no kind of a shared common understanding and purpose. And as I said in Delhi, that overwhelmingly the Indian establishment looked at this way as from the security lens, as opposed to development lens or trade lens, connectivity lens. So that's one. The second is the whole issue of security. And that relates to the security of movement in the way, either include or less. And in the whole process, the initiative is very state-centric. People are left out, especially the people of Northeast India. And they have a strong feeling that whenever a development takes place, they are never part of it. And Northeast, as I have my little experience of traveling there, is different than rest of it. Even it's different than they have a kind of an obligation to take care of their income. They think that's how they will go to heaven. So that sense that foreigners are coming and destroying their land, very strong, especially in the Northeast. So that's something we need to see. Now, in terms of infrastructure, there's since you're looking into the capacity issue, currently there are standards, principles set within the G20 and also in the European Union in terms of when you negotiate an infrastructure project or connectivity project, these are standards available, accepted. So one has to go, but these are not widely used by the state. So there are ways that you can safeguard and minimize your risk when going into the connectivity rather than keep on criticizing. I will end with one new development, which is Professor Tawfiq has written on it. Is the whole issue of Japanese involvement in the Middle East and market. So Bangladesh, Northeast, and Japan, this trilateral cooperation, which is taking centering around Mathabar. The European Union has also joined in terms of politics. So this is something Bangladesh has agreed to join in, and I think this will be a kind of a third generation model for connectivity in the Bay of Bengal. There you have an extra regional quote unquote power gets involved, and that involvement again, we should not think that it is value neutral. We shouldn't think it's the security neutral. Every state has reasons to be involved and invest in other business or in the same people. But it is not always charity. I always say that nothing is charity. So if we continue, especially from the Bangladesh, and look for getting charities out of Japan or from India, then we go. Here it is a hardcore reality that everybody comes with interest. You go with your interest and you treat. Thank you.
So I think, yeah, the floor is open now for question or comments. So Shabir Khan, you have your question.
I some regulation, very interesting, and they use the innovation issue. These are very important issues, particularly two expressions of compilation. One is regional connectivity and the other is supply, particularly in terms of regional supply. I think these two are connected. And if there is a disconnect, there is a supply chain in one world at the economic scale. So these two are so that is one and the basic statement that we started. But the thing that starts in the way of these two things is the kind of, as you rightly say, that there are complicated models in the field. You get the example of Sri Lanka. You can also take the example of Bangladesh, in Pakistan. They are on the vortex of this conflicting levels. Sri Lanka is exposed to the very difficult. My concern also by suggestion is that how do the regional countries, including Bangladesh, Indonesia, India, how do you manage these conflicting aspects of this model? Unless you do that, I think this disjuncture will remain, and the two, the regional connectivity and the supply chain, regional supply chain, these two will not work. I can also bring out another smaller thing, but it's very important, that unless the problem between Bangladesh and Myanmar is solved, right? This disconnect also will continue because China will go in a parallel way. China is coming to Bangladesh, China is going to Myanmar, but these two do not meet. There is a connect between these two. So these are some of the hitches that needs to be addressed in order to the regional connectivity and the supply chain and also the regional economic growth so works in this.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. Any other comments, questions? That Chair of and also the political science.
It was a fantastic presentation. At some point, we gave emphasis on the concept of love.
I was late.
Have to be very careful.
There should be some specific. If there is a sense of deprivation in your partners, in that case, it's really difficult to come to a point where you can create some kind of real connectivity and understanding. That's the point.
If I will say, go further, the people's perception, one of the reality, what, how did you work? It can be I was wondering, let me share a kind of joke. There was a politician who was telling his previous followers that tell people if I can win the election, that life changes. So they worked for him. So then they found that the leader's life changed. Almost like let alone the country. the next election plan for us, every time you tell us, but look, only you like this change, but not else. Let me say, you are so foolish. If am I not the part of the people? So of course, the South Asia, India's country, and we rightly said that India's size and its economy and all of those. So it's a kind of very accommodating. India can help India. But the problem here is that even though it may sound that some country, the people's perception is a barrier and it needs to be addressed. And the responsibility, as you said, Subrahmanyam rightly said that we all be out. But that people have to feel that indeed we not a deprivation, rather is addressed properly. For example, the trade imbalance. There was a time when it was so rightly emphasized that this connectivity will help us. It's a transit, how it will help the economy of all the countries in the region. So then the way it was presented and it was perceived, actually the reality has been far from that. So it's kind of asymmetrical, the benefit that we see. So sometimes the concrete result needs to be also in line with the grand the idea that we present. For example, the way you say it, I really admire. These are so clear and rational. And I'm very much convinced if this is presented this way, even the policymakers need to digest this before we go to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. The third time we are reading this week. Very candid, yesterday also discussed. And in Delhi, I could cross the my concern is different than a tradition. We're talking about that in the young women working power, in the young child. No presence and the raising of the sofa only in a private point in the other one. Draws from well, and it is said that Chinese are also from trying to build up some most of they have on the big book on very much give the proximity of Andaman. And that also draws the other power as well. And the activities of the trying mind very much militarized. One of the most militarized way they are present. But first country as three neighboring countries have nuclear weapons. And some area of Bengal is very prone to being launched by nuclear device, which definitely in a conflict situation was happening. But in a conflict situation, countries like all of countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, definitely that there are the influence of the so under these circumstances, the Bay of Bengal so much of the life. Of course, I mean, the suggested Bangladesh is also trying to bit of militarization, but that very, very not in comparison to what China is doing and drawing the US attention as well. So how do you see this type of stuff as well? So how do you see this type of stuff? Directly with this way of more economic prosperity than the military prosperity. With new equipment that is coming, with the nuclear submarines that are coming here, and the not just between India and China, it's made, whether it is southern or not being not. Can I just ask a something? In the Bay of Bengal, has there been a discussion in India about a security architecture? Because Bay of Bengal seems to be fragmented, not only in terms of activity, but also in terms of security architecture, as opposed to the rest of India. So is there the thinking that maybe time has come when they countries to put down a security structure to reassure each other that they're not alone or they're not the fact?
If the way you can comment some of the questions and then we go back to the topics.
Thank you for that. All excellent ideas, comments from love to submarine to nuclear. Good many.
That was my better one.
Yeah, all bread and butter. So a lot. And I'm very happy because we're going to continue a lot of this research and work. And my work normally worked a bit more in my PhD was more Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, but I'm very keen to do much more with Bangladesh now. So hopefully we can also think about future collaborations, research, engagements with your institute, professor, with the university. Very happy again that I saw texting Alubadi's name there. I'm going to tell him that there's something maybe we can develop a little further to develop connectivity knowledge and research knowledge, which is it's bizarre today. It's easier. Sometimes we see more of Australians, Japanese, Americans, and Europeans in Delhi than people from Nepal, Bangladesh, scholars from Sri Lanka, the neighborhood. Sometimes we're today so well connected beyond the region that I think we've neglected, relatively speaking, intra-regional research collaborations and work. I'll take them maybe in order of what came. Masrak, I don't have much more to add to all your excellent comments, especially that last one on trilateral partnerships. And also your invitation for us, not for us, for Bangladesh to look south and eastward. South. I mean, you're right. Historically, Bangladesh was deeply connected to the north, the Himalayan plateau, to trade links, linkages, etc. But there's not much happening there. To the east, with Myanmar, the land connectivity is not working well. Disputes and tensions in that bilateral relationship. So the maritime outlook southwards is critical for new export markets, also as you diversify your economy, etc. And Southeast Asia. In fact, Bangladesh is often ahead of India in terms of its Act East policy. Your expressed interest to join RCEP is path-breaking, certainly different from India's reluctance. The intensification of your relations with Japan, recent visit by Prime Minister, I think attests to that, and also your keen engagement with ASEAN. I think you did a lot of work on that while the Foreign Secretary speaks of this sort of South and East Asian outlook that I wanted to share. And the questions, I think, on first point on managing, I think is very important on connecting the regional and the global levels. You cannot have supply chains and connectivity within the region if you do not insert yourself with larger flows that are changing at the global level. For example, Japanese companies today are trying to diversify away from China. European companies too. Sometimes because they hit a plateau in terms of ceiling, in terms of Chinese investments. Sometimes also because the governments, for strategic and political reasons, are nudging companies to leave China and go elsewhere. First one is the most important. China has been a phenomenal story for many of these companies now, but it's changing its economic model into an internal growth model. So the good days for foreign investments are, relatively speaking, decreasing in terms of their margin. So many of these companies are shifting where? To new markets where they can manufacture. And in the case of Japan, that's Vietnam, that's Malaysia, Thailand, which will go now through a major second reform. Just watch what's going to happen. Whether the military stays in power or not is not the point of it. It'll be all the more important if the democratic government, of course, sustains its stays. But in Thailand, you will see a lot of changes. So that's all competition, or actually a possibility for complementarities between South Asia, Bangladesh, and India, for example, markets, and the Southeast Asian markets. Because Japanese companies are going to look at supply chains, produce, ship, in and out across South and Southeast Asia for third markets. So this is a larger geoeconomic shift that is happening, and I take your point on, therefore looking at region as part of global. Impossible to look at that. On the question on the Bangladesh Myanmar conflict, that was, I think, what asked on, you also, sorry, there was a second question. So, there's a big debate in Delhi, including with me and my colleagues, some have different views, whether politics first or economics first. It's a chicken and egg discussion, which means basically, can you develop infrastructure without having the right political leadership and establishment? So in the case of India, we're very often thinking, should we now wait for Myanmar to re-democratize, to engage and try to build our trilateral highway project we've been trying for 20, 30 years? Or should we go ahead because governments change, maybe sometime, 2-3 years, it'll then become democratic back. Should we just continue with whoever is in power to develop connectivity? You can guess which school I think of. I think it's critical to just build infrastructure. Politics will come in the way, it's true. My preference, I think the gap is so big. We're running at half a century of a gap that we cannot afford to be choosy about who to do connectivity projects. Sometimes there will be partners that are more liked ideologically, politically, etc. Different countries have differences. And conflicts will come in the way in the case of Bangladesh and Myanmar. But I guess it would be good if maybe some of that thinking would also affect Bangladesh connectivity policy. I know it's very difficult. It's a very political issue. It's a very popular and passionate issue. Bangladesh has done a tremendous formidable effort with the Rohingya crisis that has not been recognized globally, unfortunately. It has not received the support globally and even within the neighborhood from India too, which could have said, done more. But I think it's imperative for us to think beyond the current political disputes. And that brings me also to the question, sir, you had asked, which is on the military. See, you can make love and fight at the same time. Let me stick to that. No, I think there's many cases. Azerbaijan and Armenia fought a war, bad war. Within months, they were developing connectivity corridors to sustain trade and flows. Even when they're technically still at war. Russia and Europe are at war today. But Europe is still importing energy from Russia. They're at war. It's still trying to reduce, but it's still important. It's reducing, but it's still. And before, relations were not good too. Not technically at war, but Russia. And there was a Russia-European coexistence and economic interdependence. It's sustained for 10 years of relations. And even now, when there's official war, continues and will not be completely broken. So it's a challenge. I agree with you, sir, that it's going to be a challenge, militarization, conflict, politics, etc. But there are many examples where sometimes, you can do both. You can have issues where you disagree on the US and India. France and India, today I think Prime Minister Modi is going to France, disagree fundamentally on the role of Russia today. Completely different. See hugs between Prime Minister Modi and Dr. Jaishankar, Foreign Minister of Russia. Next day they go to Washington or to Paris and sign major agreements on technological alliances. What the US and India have done is an alliance for technology. I think people don't realize how important it is. So I think both are possible. I'm not saying they're always true, but they're both possible. On security architecture, there's linked to that.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. On security architecture, I'm not sure, but if I look at one place, actually I've been critical of it, but maybe now you're making me think more positively about it, which is the National Security Advisors meeting under BIMSTEC. I was critical because I was taught connectivity, I'm a connectivity obsessed person. Don't bring security into these things. What the NSA is going to meet, not the strength of BIMSTEC, which is, sir, it's a very weak organization trying to grow. And so why burden now with security, terrorism, military cooperation organizations should just have its eyes on one area. In fact, BIMSTEC is, at 14 working groups. 14, right? Now it's 7. Finally, they've reduced it. I've been pushing for this since I arrived in Delhi, just rethinking BIMSTEC and focusing on it. But maybe that is an interesting discussion to follow. When these national security advisors meet, which they have been meeting now, maybe they're discussing also on how to deal with these challenges of security cooperation, how they affect economic connectivity also. I would think of the current president of Sri Lanka, President Vikramasinghe. President Ranil had, I think as PM in 17 or 18, who knows that, spoken about a code of conduct for maritime security in the Bay of Bengal. So I think I see little elements there, but you're right, it's far from what it should be. Should have discussion among the region, inside the region, talking to our point that intra-regional discussions, coordination, cooperation mechanisms need to exist that frankly have to exclude extra-region. Cannot have the US, cannot have China, should not have Japan, or so any, should be a Bay of Bengal discussion on countries on how to develop some security, but these dialogue instruments, architecture, to agree on certain things. I'm happy Professor History here. I'm a student of diplomatics history. That's what I did in my work. To ask me why I study the Indian mindset, because I read the archives and the records. You will all know, which we all know, when we read the beautiful speeches by Prime Minister Nehru, the beautiful speeches by Prime Minister Modi. But as you all know, Mr. Mestahak knows it. Only person knows I think in this room because he's in the background doing things. Very big difference between what you say in public and what you do. Very big. That's a key to understand political foreign policy analysis, right? And on the Indian mindset, that's why I brought that expression of why you not loved. You're absolutely right. A sense of deprivation means you have to invest and deliver, not deny. And I think the Indian history in the neighborhood, post 1990s, is one of shifting from denial to delivery. Denial meaning, see, these were closed economies. Yours was also closed economy. If you have a closed economy, you're not trading with the world, you're not trading with your next door neighbor, you have dismantled rivers, borders, roads, railways, right? The history, the 1960s to 1990s, the whole world, you economists in the room, is one of regional economic cooperation and independence. That's a glory age, 50s to 80s, 90s of regional economic organization. This region was the only region in the world that was actually disconnecting from each other, fragmenting, right? So that was also, when you do that, whether it's in Delhi or in Dhaka, what do you think about political and security instruments between your neighbors? Who's going to come to power, some refugee crisis. The Indian Army chief, 2 years ago, previous one, General Narayanan, gave a very interesting speech, which for me, in 70 years of leading, I've never heard any Indian Army chief say. He said that Northeast region today is being pacified. Levels of political violence have come down for the first time in history in the Northeast region of India. Of course, Manipur now is going to be very difficult. But levels it now. And he said that to achieve the security of the Northeast region, we need connectivity with our neighbors. Now, mind you, this is the same organization, Indian Army, that for decades was saying we need to disconnect from our neighbors. Keep the jungles, let the jungles grow, in fact. Tap the rivers, fence the borders, right? Because insurgents are going to come, go, people are going to... Mobility was a threat from the Indian mentality of a military mentality. Today, the Indian Army chief in the Indian Army is inculcating, and that's the most conservative. Armies do that, right? Armies always worried about the harassed mobility. They want to be in control. That's why I'm giving that example. Today, the Indian Army, you hear voices saying we need to connect, right? It's in our interest to pacify, to reduce insurgency, to reduce political violence on our side, to connect with our neighbors. Maybe last on this disproportionate people's perceptions, absolutely, there can be a plus or a minus. They're accelerators or they're slowing down. And I think it's very important to sell connect. Selling means leaders have to be able to communicate to the people. Connectivity not as a sacrifice or as a concession, but in our interest. That's a very difficult one. Politics of reform and openness are the most difficult ones. Try to convince trade unions they'll be better off to privatization. Right? Impossible. But history shows that often that is the only way to go, and that good transitions have happened when political leaders have invested capital, have sacrificed even their own role and their own power by saying this is in the national interest 10, 20 years from now, and not just 3 years from now. For example, on water between India and Bangladesh. I hear the Bangladeshi concern about water. Like, India is unable on this specific issue. Many it has moved phenomenally, just connectivity, the change of mindset in India is phenomenal. water, that's a bridge India has not been able to cross. And realizing that by giving in on water, by being disproportionately generous or whatever, it's not generous, it's actually strategic altruism. You're actually giving in order to get 10, 20 years from now, right? But because you want to win the next election or political interests at home, you're not able to do that. That is what I'm explaining. And last on, uh, uh, yeah, I think I'll end that. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so Dr. Firoz, and I think from online, if someone wants to just, yeah, coming to you, and Dr. Joshi, you want to also say. But first, Dr. Firoz, yeah.
I'll speak like a layman. I'm not over some sort of that's my experiences and observations. Like even after in your paper, after so much work put into the university, so essentially it was a political decision. So there was not only logic behind it. So if we look at the other vision of the well, those who are bigger, like it says in Europe that German market without triggering a bullet, by helping to create the bullet. So in a partnership, there is a power relationship, and that's having the equal or equal share of the output is a difficult one. So how can you show those people?
Okay, Dr. Hushain and then Salman.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank our speaker for enlightening us about the connectivity and cooperation. Well, actually, the first thing came to my mind that how to fulfill the gap between connectivity and cooperation in the Bay of Bengal, especially when Indo-Pacific is taking a central stage, is a vital question. Professor Shahid mentioned, sometimes I actually, because of perhaps connection, I couldn't hear, but he mentioned one thing, there is no shared common understanding of security and economic constants. Actually, politics is everywhere, and politics is nothing but clash of interest. So interest of Chinese, interest of Indians, interest of all the nations. So here, one thing I find that for prosperity, our speaker at the beginning mentioned this regionalism in the Bay of Bengal is really vital. This regionalism in the Bay of Bengal is a huge region. It's like 2.7 million and 1.7 million people live in this region. It may sound very ambitious, but when we see the history, like when the Southeast Asian started their regionalism, their interconnectivity and trade in 1960s, and now we know they become a kind of model. So true regionalism create ownership and unite the people of a region, regardless the diversity of race, ethnicity, religion. And as Professor Shahid mentioned, one thing, today we have state-centric rather than people-centric. So I feel like, the Bay of Bengal, whether we can form a community of nations, and especially bringing SAARC and ASEAN regions for more cooperation. And for this cooperation, of course, I would like to hear from the speaker if he finds some barriers. But, we researcher can show a different path, bringing new ideas. The political will, a good political will, যেটা বাংলায় আমরা বলি রাজনৈতিক সদিচ্ছা, that is actually very important. Because ultimately we see the narrow national interest that block regionalism. And the community of Bob, the Bay of Bengal, which is very crucial. I'm not going to say how crucial it is. Everybody know now. But it should adopt a kind of ASEAN approach of non-interference unless human rights are severely violated. in any member state. And to fill in the gap between connectivity and cooperation, I think people-to-people contact, especially the track to institution in this region. I mean, to form a Bob community, I think really important. And SIPG of NSU with other like CPEC and other regional key institution can take the initiative of dialogue online, how to actually why I mean community of Bob means Bay of Bengal is actually important, and what are the barriers? And we know we have bilateral, uh, trilateral, multilateral, like we had trilateral. Professor Shahid mentioned about Japan, India, and Bangladesh. So ultimately, a track to institution can be really very useful so that we can have a dialogue, how we can have more people-centric. We don't confine the people in a border, like in a region. So that's why we need the leadership to think in that way. Thank you very much.
Appreciate Salman.
Dr. Xavier, thank you for your presentation. I have a bit of comment first before I delve into my question. You've taken the position that if it's a choice between politics and economics, then economics should take precedence. And I think in the case study that you've brought up, which was India and Myanmar, that approach works. But I do think that geopolitical context for different countries renders that sort of like not a catch-all advice. Because for Bangladesh at least, pursuing connectivity projects or economic engagement with Myanmar is, in a sense, enabling a regime that, or facilitating a regime that directly threatens its territorial integrity to a degree, right? So I do wonder if you have a comment on that. And to follow up off of that, to go from a sort of micro case, the greater question is like, these sorts of cases are abundant in the South Asian region, right? And in the Bay of Bengal. So how would one reconcile the need for connectivity cooperation with the divergent geopolitical interests of nations in the region? Thank you.
Thank you, Salman. I think at this point, I would like to also give a comment and question before probably going back to you and probably at the last round of questions. I think just in line with Dr. Firoz and Dr. Shim and Salman was talking on that as a political scientist also, I always believe that depoliticizing economics and connectivity probably is not possible always and also not desirable. And these are a big debate. I'm not going to delve into it. Whenever we talk about resource sharing, natural resources, river, the question of depoliticizing always comes, but it doesn't happen actually, even though that's the ideal situation. We want to see that a depoliticized economy and connectivity and resource sharing. It doesn't, and also it is a difference, as probably Salman was trying to mention, that for a big country like India and on small neighbors like Bangladesh or other countries. So India can unilaterally decide about connectivity issue at the state level with any state without keeping politics in consideration. But what happens actually in a country like Bangladesh, I think what India also needs to understand that any connectivity issue also need to be addressed from the people's trust perspective, which is now very low in, as you rightly say, South Asia, historically, now we are passing a time where we are the least connected region in the world. And also our trust level is also very low among the people level. And then this very dichotomous because you will be finding that Bangladeshi people, Nepalis, India, and Sri Lankans, they love to travel. But India is the most attractive travel destination. They love to watch Bollywood movies. And by watching this Indian series, I have seen that Bangladeshi households that people are watching and they're loving the serials. Immediate after watching the serials, they are when coming into the kind of only Adda and they're criticizing Indians foreign policy. And at the same dining table, they're watching movies and they're loving it and then they are criticizing.
On the
And they don't
on the
take
Chinese TV, Chinese made.
which
is the most important part.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. And so this is a kind of I say that I don't want to say and love was a very interesting discussion. Our relationship is like love and non-love relationship. I don't want to use hate. It's not love-hate relationship, but with India, many of the small neighbors relationship is love and non-love. So I'm not sure whether non-love is the word in English.
One-sided love is just.
But that's another thing. So I think that what people think that would be very important for the small neighbors. For India, it doesn't matter probably that, yeah, it matters for West Bengal when it comes to this stuff, but for other areas, for the Indian government, it's a big government, very powerful government, they can decide many things and people will support them. But when I'm sure, I'm not, I did some research on Myanmar, but not recently, but when India is giving a connectivity kind of a go-ahead project with the military junta in Myanmar, I'm sure they are concerned by the Myanmar people who are striving for democracy, fighting a military junta and giving their lives for last 3 years. They are seeing it differently. That okay, India is supporting our a military junta which has no legitimacy. So supporting a kind of illegitimate government anywhere in the neighborhood also creating distress about India at the people level. So that's something that probably Indian policymakers need to take into consideration. I'm sure India will not go to change its position because for connectivity and economic considerations, a country like India is very big concern now where they will not, but they need to understand that the people probably are seeing it differently, that working with the illegitimate government, Myanmar or India, other Southeast Asian country, or a kind of not popular government, something like that. Now come to the question of, so I think that for smaller neighbors, depoliticizing is very difficult because the people's concerns are there. And now coming to the question of China, and which is the elephant in the room. Anywhere in South Asia, when we talk about connectivity, without considering and also and dealing with the Chinese connectivity projects, it's very difficult to only talk about the Indian connectivity. And the problem is I'm seeing in Bangladesh even that Bangladesh government or even many of the South Asian governments, they discuss this separate. Okay, separate discussion for Belt and Road, a strategy, and then another separate strategy for Indo-Pacific, and then another separate strategy for Indian connectivity projects or other things. And that's not helping the small neighbors like Bangladesh. We need to have a comprehensive framework because without Bangladesh is a part of BRI, and that's the reality. Bangladesh wants to be part of BRI. Bangladesh happy to be, very happy to be part of BRI. And Bangladesh wants to carry forward, but that doesn't mean that Bangladesh doesn't want to have connectivity with Indian projects. But India does not, I don't know how India sees this, but Bangladesh needs a comprehensive connectivity policy where they need to say that this is our BRI policy. And that's the way I want to also deal with Indo-Pacific. And that's the way I also want to deal in the same policy framework that we try to do, unfortunately, we failed. And from SIPG, we did a series of events on Indo-Pacific, especially when Bangladesh government was trying to develop a Indo-Pacific outlook. And we invited the secretary, we drafted it, and we tried to tell him that come up with a comprehensive strategy or outlook, both Indo-Pacific, BRI, or whatever in the Southeast Asia. Again, we made a kind of sporadic, kind of isolated outlook and strategy. How to deal with China's BRI? India needs to also frame a counter because we all, and why it is like this, because Chinese investments are seen, and again I'm seeing from the people's perspective, it's safer investment than Indian investment. The people's, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, because China is a very distant neighbor, and and we don't have problems with China in the borders or historical kind of thing. And China's, we did a survey with Indian, our friend in CSDS Delhi with the State of Democracy in South Asia survey, and the question was which country is seen as the most friendly. So China came as one of the friendliest country. Bangladesh, even in Sri Lanka, Nepal also, I also was part of that. So this is different, and we have to also understand the policymakers that people think that Indian investment and Chinese investments are two different kind of things. Not same. Chinese connectivity projects and Indian connectivity projects have different kind of implications for the country. Because one is on our immediate neighbors, largest neighbor. Bangladesh is worried because they are surrounded by India. Only the Bay of Bengal is there. And then there are concerns like we have done a lot in terms of giving these transshipment facilities and other kind of thing, helping India for stabilizing Northeast. One of the Indian Brigadier General was telling me in Delhi that Bangladesh could ask India to give some money because the money that India used to spend in Northeast before 2008 or before 2006, a few billions of dollars that have come down very low because Bangladesh helped a lot to stabilize and not allowing any this outlaw groups to function in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh could ask. But then Bangladesh did not ask anything, unfortunately, but we didn't get also much. So when it comes to connecting with Nepal, with Bangladesh, this chicken neck that we wanted, and Nepal also wanted, because they wanted to use our Chittagong port, Mongla port, and that would be huge help for them. And that's never been discussed seriously. BBIN is still in a very discussion thing. And one of the point that I also probably a little bit provocative here that I'm seeing that one of the India's weakness is I do understand that India was not happy with SAR. That's understandable, but India did not try or could not make an alternative of SAR, a functional, viable alternative of SAR. BIMSTEC is not, as you also said, I'm sure Professor Shoaib also will agree this, will agree that it's not actually functioning as expected. BBIN is also something which is still some progress is being made, but not like a real regional connectivity or kind of regional forum. So SARC is dysfunctional. So what is the alternative? We are working on this not yet. So all these things, I think Indian policymakers need to see and take it into consideration. And also they need to understand that China will be there also. That's the reality. China will not be out of the South Asia region. China's presence will be increasing. And how to accommodate? We will be very happy, like small neighbors in South Asia. If we see that China, India holds hand and shake hands and they become friends, our life will be much easier. Our life, I told it to our Japanese ambassador when we discussed this in Bangladesh, Japan, Indo-Pacific, India issue, that was China invited in Indo-Pacific kind of IPS when it was launched, and he couldn't answer directly. He said that I have to check it. So if China could be part of Indo-Pacific and America and India could be part of BRI, our life could be much more easier in the smallest neighbors that were there. But that's not possible to understand. But so I just brought some of the political issues, but I think this are also needed to be considered when we try to depoliticize connectivity. Because without those, the depoliticization is not possible. It will be very much politicized.
Can I add one just curious one that our export to India, RMS, crossed 1 billion from the side. So even though it's a total trade activity, because I think the connectivity has gotten momentum now. It needs direction.
There is quite a point probably that is about the transitive conversations of getting expected transit duty by providing.
But I think, Professor, that's our problem. We didn't ask for it. India was not, was never saying that we are not going to give you. But if you don't ask it,
Let me clarify. Let me clarify. Let's not create on this. The transit agreement has a clause where two things. One is that there will be a fixed fee, which has then worked out in the agencies. So there is a fee for 120 people that Bangladesh gets. 120 people from India and Bangladesh or 900. All handled. Plus, it has also been said that there will be India will make LOC available for maintenance and upgrading of roads. Should be used for this purpose. It's just written. I can still read it. So let's not create confusion that is free. It was not given.
Yeah. Excellent. I need to come back many more times. Discuss a lot, but really helpful. I'm just learning and thinking. See, Brexit, I will look at it otherwise. You're right, Brexit is a step back, right? It's a political decision that did not make economic sense. But at the same time, look that despite being outside of the European Union, the UK and EU were able to develop an economic partnership that sustains the gains. Maybe it doesn't deepen them, but sustains the gains in the last 40 years. So I give this example. I think it's very difficult for the UK today to opt out. We saw that. The point, there's a political, let's call it from an economic behavioralist perspective, irrational decision. I have trouble with that language, but let's assume that is a bad economic decision for political, ideological, emotional, whatever. It's purely political. But despite that, the economic relationship was locked in. And we saw how difficult it was to implement Brexit, right? Because practically everyone started realizing that you need to be connected to the economy. And it's not ideal, obviously. It's going to suffer even economic relationship, but it's pretty well locked in. Today, if you look at mobility agreements, trade agreement, investment agreements, the UK is primus inter pares, and EU, among all others, the most EU member of all countries, right? That EU. So that's my point. That politics will come and go, and let's imagine the South Asia in 2070, right, where this happens, maybe. But we'll be still better off if there'll be a Brexit, Bangladesh exit, or whatever, or Sri Lankan exit, right, from whatever it is. I think those are smaller problems compared to the ones we have today, where you cannot drive across borders. I grew up in Europe, in Portugal, where we were smuggling microwaves from Germany into Portugal and being stopped by police, harassed. I mean, you all know this better than I. A little bit in the 1980s. You know how difficult it is in the borders. No man's land. I was in the Terai in Pradesh, in southern Nepal. People speak about the Indian-Nepal border that is open. It's not open. It's medieval. Yes, it's open. People, cows, cattle, trade, smugglers cross, marry, etc. But you cannot take a road. Right? There's no infrastructure. That is not open border to me. Open means mobility in this day and age, 21st century. But then you need to develop the infrastructure. And that again, I think the larger point is not about my simplistic. I was saying between economics and politics, the hyper simplistic of a binary which doesn't apply. But we have to aim to depoliticize. Yes, it's always political, but we have to reduce the politics. It's not about making economics empty of politics or ignoring politics. Sometimes there must be, political decisions need to be taken. But if you go down that road, every leader will tell you, oh, politics, but I can't do this. The planning, the economic, the vision, horizons are going to be very myopic day to day, right? If you infuse too much politics. Depoliticizing, of course, is an ideal. I think will never be achieved. Brexit. Thank you for that question. Because if even the highest postmodern European Union, we still have politics playing out. When European football championships happen, the hooligans travel across. The Schengen opt-out clauses are activated. Suddenly, German police stops and closes the border. Pandemic was a reminder of how other non-political, but other in this case viruses can lead countries to insulate immediately and close the border. So it'll always be there. But I think the aim, and something I've not seen assimilated widely in South Asia and intellectual, political, and the research community, is that the benefits of interdependence are the ultimate goal. And politics will come the way. But I agree, sometimes politics is so bad that why not? But I'll come.
Thinking. Yeah. The European Union has been so far accepted. So there was a NATO. Has there been no NATO? Possibly things could have been different, especially now that we. So, do you think that it becomes viable when both the security politics and business get better? Indirectly.
Absolutely. The steel and coal story, we forget. I mean, you're pushing in the politics and security argument, which in some cases is paramount. The European Union would not have happened. No one likes to say this without the American security umbrella and coercion. Americans were funding, putting money to destroy the communists in Greece. There was active interference by the Americans in Europe, political interference and coercion and push and inducements, the German Marshall Plan, right? Billions and billions being poured to ensure that that area was going to be free from communist Soviet influence. So I hear, yes, I think, but in South Asia, if I may now extrapolate a little bit, I think that it's a bit different in age, which means what you created in Europe is two blocks. You divided Europe, Germany. My mother's German. People forget the country was divided in two, with the capital in two blocks. You couldn't move. It's two different planets. But in South Asia, and in today's days and age, I think rather than excluding powers or having a parallel power bringing you together, India will never be accepted as such, as that told. You need to include powers. So the challenge is different. The external powers need to be managed, included, and you have to do that cooperatively among you. You will not be coerced in use. I don't see anyone able to. China will not able to do that. India will not able to do. US cannot. So to push countries, otherwise, and I don't see partition happening in this day and age like we saw in Europe. You can't. The levels of interdependence and flows are so complex that it's unimaginable that we have, an archipelago or block, two blocks in some economic. In fact, the China-US story is the most interesting. These are deeply entrenched economies. People talk about decoupling. It's impossible. Every decision maker in the US knows that decoupling is a big word, but it's used strategically and tactically, but it's impossible to achieve. Can't. We just saw what happened in the recent visit. On the question on Professor Udin asked, 4 principles that I'd like to share. One is openness. The region has to be open. I keep using a statement by Prime Minister Hasina, I think in 2011, the Maldives Summit, where she, well beyond even any Indian leader articulating this, said that the growth of South Asia hinges on connection with externally. We have to open South Asia, which is something that in the Indian mindset was not so strong. It's now open and strong. India is comfortable working with Japan, for example, but has developed over the last 10 years now. So the idea that India is open to Japanese presence and cooperating. India now has trilateral partnerships with the EU in the region, with France, with Germany. It's consulting more with the US, with China, of course, not. But I think the region has to be open, number one. Second point I think you made is about state-centric. You must do 2 things to get this done. One is decentralize, right? It cannot be capital-led. Subnational levels need to be engaged. The connectivity is essentially on the borderlands, the border provinces, state governments, etc. So unless you decentralize decision making and listen to people in the Northeast region, for example, investor saying, or get West Bengal on board on water, you will not be able to lead from the capitals, including in not only big countries, in smaller countries. For example, in Sri Lanka today, to connect with India, you need to develop the port in Jaffna, which they're doing. the Kanka Sajurai Port, right? So you decentralize and allow these subnational units to connect the neighboring provinces. Private sector is essential. We don't live anymore in South Asia after the 90s. Today, there are strong private sector stakeholders in regionalism. In India, it's formidable to see Ambassador can be part of the Near Bangladesh dialogue that private companies now are interested in Bangladesh because you're growing, you're wealthier than India, right? So there are companies that are seeing opportunities in Bangladesh and investing. Private sector is putting, we can't look up to the government, the state to do what they used to do, what they not, I mean, what they never actually delivered on. I mean, if you won't wait for public sector companies from India to deliver, they're not even able to deliver on most accounts within India. So forget coming abroad and delivering on big infrastructure or energy or ICT. The private sector is key. Professor mentioned also the ASEAN approach to non-interference. That's true, but ASEAN has something else. ASEAN has also consensus building mechanisms. Again, to your question about regionalism, I think these are more work. Maybe we think both these questions. See, ASEAN or Myanmar developed consultations. They talk to each other. I'm not sure in South Asia this happens. So your point is taken also the ball, you need to talk more to each other. And on the politics, on the security, there's a long history in South Asia. So you'll know this. 1970, Prince Indira Gandhi started this, which was a forum. In fact, SARC was born like this. People forget. It's a forum, leaders forum. Before SARC was there were conferences in the early 80s that led towards SARC in 86. And it was always a conference of leaders. So leaders would meet once a year. All the top leaders in South Asia would meet. When was the last time the top South Asia leaders have actually met? So there you go. You need to develop maybe the NSA level, but top level. It's very different when you meet President Indira Gandhi would meet President Jayapardhan and talk about what's happening there, what's happening in South. So consensus building is important on these political issues. On there, I have a proposal. I think the time is right. Let me just give a provocative idea. We just finished a paper on land connectivity. Everything is maritime, and I agree that's the priority. But can you have maritime connectivity without land-to-land connectivity? You can't just have a hub and spoke system where the hinterland, say northeast, is connected to the ports and you export to the world. What about the land-to-land, hinterland to hinterland? The arch around the Bay of Bengal. For example, northeast region with northern Myanmar, Bangladesh with Myanmar. That is missing. And that's something that needs much work on. So instead of an India-Myanmar trilateral highway or Bangladesh joining us to that highway, I think a political consultation mechanism, maybe ministerial between Bangladesh, Myanmar, India, and Thailand, those four countries, BIMT, let them meet. I think BIMSTEC is having a ministerial now or a retreat or just had. But that's different. Sri Lanka is there, Nepal is there, Bhutan. But just these four countries, the eastern land neighbors of the Bay of Bengal, Bangladesh, India, and Bangladesh should be first. BIMT. These four countries need to develop a cluster of consultation. I know it's very difficult, but I just leave out the idea in terms of these politics. Professor asked on how to reconcile economics and how to use See, just give you one example. You have to write. India is not reconciled. India is not joined the Belt and Road Initiative, right? But it has the largest trade, one of the two largest trade relationships with China. Many countries have opted out of things. So again, I think I brought that in my first comment. It's not about there'll be different speeds, different levels of comfort in terms of reconciling economic connectivity with political interests. For India, for example, it could have benefited so much from the Belt and Road Initiative, but it's not comfortable. And you're right, I've chosen another example of different comforts. Maybe on Myanmar, other interests weigh on the Indian mind for finishing a 20-year-old trilateral highway that's still not been built. And it's doing progress, by the way, right? Despite that, because India is gaining out of that. But to Professor Hunt's last excellent points on this politics, absolutely, you need popular buy-in. You need to sell these projects, mention it. I would say that sometimes we overrate a little bit how easy things are for India. I hear this a lot in the smaller states. And there's one state I know pretty well, it's the Indian state I've been studying for 20 years. And I'll tell you, we overrate what the Americans or Nepalis or Bangladesh how amazing and formidable and great and the Indian state is. These are structures that did not think about connectivity for 10, 20 years ago. That's why I gave that army chief example. The regulations are state capacity is very weak in India. the multiple ministries. It's very, all applies also to Bangladesh, but I think that's a problem India has to solve, to deliver more, what I was saying, instead of denying. When you're denying, you don't need capacity. You're just blocking. I remember stories in the 1980s where the king of Nepal would ask something from Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. They would meet 2 years later, the king would say, oh, you had promised me the hydro project in Nepal. And literally, I had on record, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi would say, oh, I forgot about it, or I have not received the file, can you send it again? You think India can get away with this today, after 2 years? No. It may do it, but it'll pay huge price, because China will build, China will do stuff, Japan will do things. So competitive instruments are pushing India to deliver much more. But we shouldn't think of India being also formidable in terms of its capacity to live in. I think often separating intent and capacity is very important. Some things India's intent does not want to deliver, wants to deny. But my assessment is mostly capacity issue these days. Everyone in Delhi is gung-ho about connectivity and has realized the gravity of the situation in terms of delivering more, finding new ways, new instruments to deliver more and better and faster. So the paradox today is that we've done studies on this. India is delivering more, better, and faster than ever before to its neighbors in 70 years. Finance instruments, private sector engagement, scholarships, exchanges. But the paradox is it's still too little, too slow, and not good enough. Right? That's racing against time. But I would agree a little bit on you on the Bangladesh strategy. You know, there's been some interesting literature on this. Small states, how they negotiate turbulence, these expectations. And of all the countries in South and Southeast Asia, Bangladesh actually comes out as one of the best countries that has managed this turbulence. And there are many political science explanations. One is political stability, which is correlated positively always with decision making and ability to take long-term decisions. You're not looking at next year's elections, etc. Right? So we've had now a strong political stability. Second one is state bureaucracy capacity. If you compare this with other countries in the region, Sri Lanka, by any indicator, the bureaucracy of Sri Lanka has declined since the 1990s for many other reasons. Nepal the bureaucracy is extremely limited. Right? Total policy, foreign policy paralysis. Nepal is the worst spot. It has not even benefited from China, right? Nothing. The 12 projects they've been asking for, 8 to 12, depending on who you listen to, none of them has gone. And all the China puts this rubber stamp of BRI and everything, which is not much. But Bangladesh has done pretty well. That's at least what I've seen in the literature, but that does not mean that you require a strategic comprehensive method, which is exactly what I opened with today. And there's a finding of our report is that you need a holistic understanding, Professor Hari mentioned, that informs decision making. And that's that state capacity also, intellectual scholars, and pushing reports, assessing who's giving what, also looking backwards, what worked, what not. It'd be worth looking now, what has China actually committed and done in Bangladesh? Where has it done well? Why not? Where has India done well? Why not? I think those discussions we have to do much more in research. Bangladesh helping the Northeast and the pacification of the Northeast, very important point. It'd be interesting to quantify that. It would help make Bangladesh's case. At least then you would not have pacified the Northeast region without our support. Expeditions, blocking Bangladesh as a safe haven, as it was in the past for insurgents and terrorists in India. But by the way, also India has extradited also people to Bangladesh that you got. So making cost benefit is difficult, but it would be interesting to look at that. And finally, on regionalism, the question on SAR, I wrote a paper on this, and no alternative. So you had mentioned, was it on no alternative to SAR? Sorry, you had to. I have a slightly heterodox view on this. I think the age of intergovernmental top-down organizations is over. Heavy government-led intergovernmental top-down. What you see at the global level is a fragmentation. Climate was COP. The COP system was an intergovernmental UN top-down system. It's fragmenting since Paris. If you look at the project we're doing now, that India is doing everything on climate on a variety. International Solar Alliance, Coalition for Disaster Risk Infrastructure, Quad as a climate and tech group, bilateral climate partnerships, India-EU, India-Denmark now, India-Japan. So there's a fragmentation of that system. WTO, you will know, also the same is happening. And there's now more sector-oriented, nimble, flexible regions. Clusters of countries on certain sectors working on issues. Supply chain, for example, right, on trade. Now you have clusters of countries deciding what to trade where. And I know that the orthodox view on trade is not going to work. I'm not an economist and judge, but this is the direction things are going. So the region also, I think there's much more value to work on, for example, maritime issues or trade in a more clustered perspective. BBI is a bit of that. I hear it's not done so well, but I think it's in that direction that we have to go in terms of flexible regionalism. And I don't think BIMSTEC will fill ever that SARC role because there is less and less role for that type of organizations. Thank you.
Just supplementation, just by one observation. That in the absence of, I do understand the last point you made that global trend is like that, fragmentation of regional organization. But I think in the case of South Asia, since there was no strong regional organization structure, I think the absence will lead us towards merging with the global alliances, something like that. I think the Pacific will come in a manner there we follow. And there come that either we go for a regional security alliance or either because of India probably many of the countries push to be part of the Pacific and Asian network eventually. And I'm seeing the Asian network in. So because we don't have our regional security or even the regional kind of a thing. So then it will be more dangerous for countries like Bangladesh that we got into a fight between Asian network versus Chinese alliances and this ERI versus Pacific. So because there will be, I do understand that the capacity gap of mechanisms and other things are also the probably like tensions now. So this will be, even though this is a kind of hypothetical projection, but that might lead to them.
If I may, I think we're seeing, I mean, Asian NATO as a whole, I don't know where they're going. NATO is an alliance of mutual defense. I don't see anyone proposing any of them. India, in fact, is extremely wary about that, of any commitment, which means you have to protect each other in times of need. You're committing your troops to wars that are being fought by others. I don't see any indication of any security treaty for mutual defense pact on that side. Nor do I see from China also the ability and to push back with China. But the issue is much more complex, which is you see two different trajectories. The Americans, not NATO, right? Americans have realized the diminishing marginal utility of security and political instruments. So Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, much more about economic development. That trajectory is clear. Whether they're too late, some are saying it's far too late. They've paid a price for the whole security, military mindset, and focus on China. It's too late. But let's see, that trajectory with IPEF and several instruments is there. I think will continue. From China, you see a very different trajectory. From Belt and Road Initiative, win-win economic cooperation, pure development, to a global security initiative that they launched with expectations of greater political security cooperation. So this is a crossroads, you're absolutely right. But two big powers are adjusting their instruments, one towards more economic, let's see, maybe too late, and one towards security, maybe too early. That's the big discussion. Even within the Chinese system, are we jumping the gun? Are we doing security and politics too fast? Yeah, that's why I mean they can't correct it. But there are very interesting debates in both of those powers. And to your point, but I'm not sure that countries in this region, and I see two types of mentalities in the region, Southeast Asians, Indian Ocean region, let's call them smaller states. One is this is all going to be very messy, and we have to look the other way, or be neutral, or just be friends with everyone all the time. And the second mentality that is, this is going to become very messy and turbulent, and we have to make choices. Constant choice, not one choice, not aligning in one direction or the other, but every day choices, 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 which are going to upset China one day, the US the other day, India the other day. That is foreign policy, that is strategy. That is very difficult. You need state capacity, you need bureaucrats, you need political leadership that has that foresight. You need research community that assess and inform decision making, saying this is good, this is dangerous, this will be better in this area. But that's a very, very complex. That's something states in this region have never had to do. Because they were always under the US umbrella, and in fact under the US-China umbrella, Southeast Asia. From 71 until the last 10 years, the US-China umbrella that allowed the growth of Asia. And now there's a problem between those two and different major powers aligning. So smaller states now better equip themselves to think about this. But you have to take choice, not one choice, not choices. Choice means, oh, I'm going only with the American camp. There's no camps. This is very, but informed choices that are going to be very sometimes costly, tough to sell at home, abroad. Now we see in Bangladesh how everyone is in some camp are upset that Bangladesh is keeping quiet. But it's going to be very, very difficult. And I think that will be the foreign policy challenge for Bangladesh. Also for India, by the way. People think India doesn't, again, India is an amazing, omnipotent power. You should see the debate in India today. What is the cost of paying for siding with the Russians on many things? On being quiet, on actually supportive in some ways. The West is very upset with India. It's a deeply polarizing issue. But still, you have to navigate, constantly give to the Americans a little bit, give to the Japanese a little bit, give here to the Europeans, give to Russia a little bit. Right? Those are the trade-offs that are going to be very, so even India, I'm just giving examples. So all the more small states are even more subject to winds and pressures and have less capacity, they have less relative power. So preserving that strategic autonomy is going to be critical. And it's going to be a very interesting time for all of us researchers, I think, over the next decades, because it's going to be, as Professor said, a very turbulent and different expectations and camps and very volatile.
Thank you very much. We are almost at the end. If there is any, maybe the last 2 or 3 questions or comments, and then we can probably conclude. Raymond? Okay.
Once again, thank you, Dr. Xavier, for your very interesting, very thought-provoking, and basically have given us and provide us a lot of food responding to digest. So just a very quick question, building on the remarks given by Professor Tofik and Ambassador Han. So it seems to be there is now a convergence of national interests. I mean, among Japan, India, and Bangladesh, and what Ambassador called this trilateral partnership. So my question perhaps is to what extent this I mean Japan's growing enthusiasm into infrastructural investment into Bangladesh and Northeast India, and also India's also growing enthusiasm in meeting the growing energy needs for Bangladesh to be in the form of friendship pipeline. So to what extent can we say this growing ties among these 3 countries can set a tone for counterbalancing China's growing geopolitical ambition in the region? And yes, I just would like to know what's your observation or assessment.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Xavier, for such a wonderful presentation. And it's a very interesting thing to know about, especially for specialists like me. But I was just thinking that whenever you are talking about connectivity and cooperation in the Bay of Bengal region, do you think that human trafficking or cross-border migration can be a very critical issue to look at? Particularly, I am thinking that whether
whether all the countries within this region can really work for a comprehensive policy measure to deal with the challenges related to human trafficking and cross-border migration. Thank you.
Any other one? Dr. Joshi, did you want to talk again, or that was the hand that you raised before?
No, just 1 minute. Actually, I would like to say what to our distinguished speaker. That most of the people of Bangladesh, so far I know the academicians, they still believe in the basis of our foreign policy of Bangladesh. Oh, yeah, the basis of our foreign policy, as our founding father, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman say, the friendship to all, malice to none. Still, I think this is the basis of our foreign policy. Personally, I think that until the last moment, or until it is obvious for Bangladesh to join any security group, it is best to maintain the balance. And joining any security forum can bring further insecurity for Bangladesh. Either it's China-led security forum or US-led security forum Quad. Thank you very much.
So three last questions. The first one is on China. Thank you, and very interesting because it reminds me also of the other point that Mr. Hakan made on we cannot ignore China, its connectivity initiatives in Bangladesh. One point in India, actually, I tend to argue that please ignore China. Just do more. Don't be obsessed about what China. If you haven't built the bridges, the roads, the rivers to connect with your next door neighbor, why are you so obsessed about countering, denying what China's doing? Right? That's just so you're right. It cannot be wished away. It's a part of the region. But I think often the security mindset, someone was asking about India's security mindset in the Bay of Bengal, the excessive geopolitical security focus is actually detrimental because you're not even done the basics in terms of developmental partnerships, in terms of developing that into. And I can give you examples we have listed that are just, should be apparent to all of us. How this region is disconnected. It's tragic. It is just abysmal. Right? We look at visa policy. It's more difficult to get visas within the region for Chinese or Americans to come to the region. Right? We're making it more difficult to connect within the region. Airline connectivity, we've done a study. Look at the airline connectivity within the region. To fly to Nepal, I can only fly to Kathmandu from India. But a single other airport. In Janakpur, to fly up to Kathmandu and down. Right? None of the airports says that. So no slots, no connectivity, no ports, no trade. There's no deep sea port in the western coast of Thailand. Now bring up to Thailand because it's a maritime neighbor of India. Bangladesh too? Yeah, you have a tri-junction point, yeah. 78. Yeah. You're a maritime neighbor of Thailand. And you don't have a western port. Now they're developing one run-off port to the Thailand. Because what? No, not deep sea. They're trying to do that. With a land bridge now towards Chumpon on the Gulf of Thailand. But if you look at Thailand's, it tells you about countries. Thailand's growth was massive Japanese investment in the late 80s to develop their economic corridor bit on the east. That is a big area of reforms in Thailand that made Thailand into a middle income economy today. But they're exhausted. No, this was the other port in east of Bangkok.
That's the model they're using for Mata Party.
Yes, that's the idea that the Japanese have now for Bangladesh, Northeast region, to create a manufacturing hub in this East and South Asia region. Right? But that propelled Thailand to a whole new development. And Bangladesh is exactly there now, right? Pushing itself up to that middle income status. And the difficulties in that position in the next 3-4 years to renegotiate a variety of economic arrangements with the EU, with India also being negotiated, etc. So on the China point, that's just what I like to say, that the massive deficit should not allow us to overrate and be fixated. The Americans, for good reasons, are. They're superpowers, so they have their eyes. But even the Americans have learned. That's what I'm saying. They're moving more into the economic development area. But the Americans will not have any capacity that they used to have in the Cold War. right? But they would build, do these things across Asia, Africa. It's just these economic models in the US and Europe are just stagnating. There won't be massive capital coming out of the economy that can be generated to invest. The European Investment Bank is coming now. There's some interesting, of course, they're massive, but it's going to be decreasing. So next door, India, Japan, China, but I think we need much more on that. So to your point on counterbalancing, that language is fine, but I think we don't have to focus on balancing. Just do what we should have done in Asia 20, 30, 40 years ago in South Asia. Right? Why don't you have direct maritime shipping route to Western? Why is Thailand now thinking of doing a Western seaport, deep seaport on its western coast in the Andaman Sea? Because it's seeing the roads happening in Bangladesh and India. It wants to connect. Right? So that's the growth engine that is going to solve, I think, a lot of issues and will require a lot of political attention. Right? See how difficult this hydro trilateral project, the energy project in Nepal, India, and Bangladesh took years of work. Something could have happened 40 years ago. Right? Nepal sitting on top of the largest hydropower potential in the world, but actually was importing from India electricity 10 years ago, and now finally is exporting. On the question of trafficking, we have a very interesting paper here by the Thai professor, which is exactly about that, where he's actually saying that we need these complex emergencies that are going to cost dearly on connectivity, because they're going to disrupt flows. So he actually proposes sort of a model for countries to develop on human trafficking, refugees in the BIMSTEC region that builds on the ASEAN experience. So there's a lot, again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel of regions. Just look at what other regions have achieved. Take different, you don't have to follow the European model, the ASEAN model, the ECOWAS model, the NAFTA, the Mercosur model. Pick and choose and adopt flexible regionalism to develop clear trucks. Took minutes to cross the Thai-Laos border today. You see how long they take, days to cross the border in South Asia. Right? So again, those are the things we should keep our eyes fixed on. And last, the question on foreign policy, on friendship with all and malice to none. Absolutely. I think that's also India's policy, right? That's why India today is the only major power that is comfortable sitting on a RIC trilateral with China and Russia, RIC, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that includes Pakistan, and next they do a Quad discussion. So I think there's actually much more that India, Bangladesh share in terms of strategic thinking and autonomy. Then, frankly, India shares often with the US or Western countries, etc. This balancing, like you rightly put it, but constant, flexible, dynamic balance. Constant, minute by minute. Mr. Sherlock will know he was in the every day. You have to take a decision. What are you going to do? And paralyzing is not a solution. You have to do actually more. Spread your risk. Do what India has done. Don't buy the Indian non-alignment strategy. India's non-aligned has never aligned. India's aligned. 1971 was almost an alliance with the Soviets. Right? So countries have tilted, aligned. I mean, it's alliance, alignment. We can now have a nice vocabulary discussion whether 71. My colleagues and I are having journal articles with an alliance or not 71. But it de facto was a massive partnership that shifted the attention towards the Soviet Union and did quite well for India till 1991. And now there's just a constant, the India way, he won't use the external affairs minister's approach in his book, is one of constantly balancing by diversifying. Diversifying means is spreading your eggs in different baskets. It's a risky strategy, not easy, but that's the only way. There will be different ways. There will be Bangladesh way also to do this. And I see that. In fact, I don't think we should be holding Bangladeshi foreign policy in higher regard for what it has achieved for the last few decades. To carve out that stability, that autonomy, and constantly evolve this Bangladesh way for strategic, flexible diversification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Xavier. And not long anything, just to have a kind of my own take. And with that report launching, do understand that connectivity is becoming a more talked and discussed topic within the policy frameworks, and the political commitments are there. Looks like, and it's been put in last few years and for decades that now every capital, the policymakers, they are talking more about that than before, which is a positive thing. But with the cautionary note, the challenges that we can understand with the discussion, and that there is still now governance deficit, and also probably the And not only in terms of economic connectivity, but also as Dr. Xavier mentioned, I fully agree that in terms of knowledge connectivity. This is a beginning. We are trying to build a more connectivity with our Indian partners like any other regional partners. We have very strong partnership in South Asia Institute of Policy and Governance, with the Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai campus, and also in the Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, Bengal University, private university, and CSDS, which is kind of political polling centers. But we'll be very happy to work more with this your center and see that how we can have more joint research and some publications in the future. Because as you rightly mentioned, that we see that our universities more universities from the north are coming, and but we have very less of south cooperation, unfortunately. But we want to build that, and that's the objective. And South Asian Institute, we have South Asian students coming here from Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, it's coming. We are very well connected with Nepal, Bhutan also in terms of joint research projects. We are regularly doing so, and also with the added, but hoping that more cooperation with students. Thank you very much, Dr. Xavier, for coming and giving your time. And it was a wonderful discussion. I can see that we have a small group, but very vibrant, very interactive, and everyone enjoyed. I personally loved it. Thank you very much. We have a small token of appreciation. Patience of living. It's too heavy to carry. I know you are going airport from here. If it's too heavy, you can keep some of yours. Yeah, I will. Carry home and share with my colleagues. Yeah, but most of the something. You have a very good library. I have also 2 copies for your library. Most of the South Asian